Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good day to wherever you are and whenever you're watching this video. I'm Danny, and it's time for another video. Today, we are continuing to draft Chapter 11 of my second book of my Persevering Heart series. The title of which is called A List of Names for Vivian. The first book has already been written. It is already out there on Amazon, available to pre-order. At least the ebook version is. The paperback will be available on release day. The book is releasing on August 1st, 2026. And it will be in ebook and paperback format. So today we're working on book 2 of Persevering Hearts. Good morning. I'm so happy that you're here. Take a seat, let's get started. So we're picking up where we left off on the last video. And the last video we drafted the first really pivotal, well, really turned out to be a very pivotal, very major scene. So it's the first scene in the novel. I'm sorry, not in the novel, in chapter 21. My goodness. It's early in the morning, y'all. I'm still somewhat waking up, so just bear with me. Anyway, we drafted the first scene of chapter 11 in the last video. If you want to know what that video is kind of all about, you can go back and watch it, and that way you can kind of catch up and kind of see where we've left off. So really quickly, that scene was a very pivotal conversation between Vivian and her oldest son, Kyle, about everything going on that kind of led up to how Vivian handled herself when she was, raising her two sons, and how she dealt with her crazy, abusive, narcissistic, soon-to-be ex-husband, Gregory, who is, of course, Kyle's father and Kyle's younger brother, Derek's father as well. So that was a big pivotal conversation. A lot happened. That was one of those really deep, raw, emotional moments that took place, and I was very excited to wind up getting it drafted and written down, and I think it turned out really, really good. So I'm really happy with it overall. The first thing we're going to do is, before we actually start trying to decide what we're going to do with the subsequent scenes following that, is we're going to go back and make a little update. If you remember from yesterday's video, when I was going over the ChatGPT feedback for this scene, it said that there was a moment, and again, spoilers, you've been warned, but Vivian did have a moment where she kind of officially kind of comes out to Kyle. And I haven't gone into too much detail, and this may be something I have to developmentally look at, later on when I go into developmental editing. I haven't touched on it too much, but Vivian has not really been ready to, prescribe some sort of label as to her sexual orientation or anything like that. She's obviously comfortable, around, lesbian women, gay men, that sort of thing. And, she has admitted as much, even before this moment, that she was in a relationship with a woman before she was with Gregory. And I think in this scene, she's just now kind of coming into that realization and just understanding, I actually am gay. And of course, there's this moment where, Kyle and her kind of celebrate together, and then it's just like, oh, well, we got to go to dinner. It's still Pride Month. We got to celebrate this. You just came out. And, and Vivian doesn't want to make a fuss about it, but, it really is important. So, for her, to have that celebration and to kind of sit in that moment. So I think as we go into the chapter, she eventually realizes that. But what the ChatGPT feedback was about was that it needed to have some space. We had all of this other stuff, pretty heavy emotional stuff, happen before that moment, that kind of led up to that moment, really. And all of a sudden it's just like, oh, well, Vivian sits there for a moment and she thinks about it. She said, you know what, I guess I am gay. I guess we all are. and then it kind of moves on from there. And so that's a piece of pacing feedback that ChatGPT gave. And in the beginning yesterday, I don't remember if I mentioned this, but I know in my head I was kind of thinking, I don't think this is paced incorrectly. I think it's paced just fine. But then again, I was just fresh off of the writing the moment. So I wanted to look at that moment, and like I said, ChatGPT was giving like generalized feedback in its tone, but not necessarily in its content, if that makes sense. So I went back and looked at that sentence, and I just had it. I thought I had it highlighted. Here it is. Because there's this moment, and how do I describe? So she's learning for the first time in this moment that not only is obviously her oldest son is in a relationship with a man. She knows that because she's been in Atlanta staying with Kyle and Nate. So she knows that they're in a relationship. She understands that. She already acknowledged that, like, in chapter 3, 4, or 5, somewhere up there. That was directly acknowledged between the two of them. And she didn't make a fuss about it. But there's a moment here that Kyle and Vivian are talking about how she needs to talk to Derek, and Vivian's just not really feeling that. And anyway, as part of that moment, Kyle is just like, well, he's basically moved on, especially now that he has Sam, and Vivian is confused, and she's like, well, Sam? Who's that? And Kyle's just like, well, it's his boyfriend. And Vivian just kind of sits there, and she's just like, well, good Lord, are we all gay? And of course, Kyle, he says something, but he eventually is just like, well, you're gay? And so the moment here is, I think, was too quick. So after Kyle's like, you're gay? To Vivian, what I have drafted in here is Vivian thought about it for a moment, but the idea settled with her pretty quickly, and then followed by the dialogue. Yeah, I guess I am. And then Kyle hugs her, and then there's a whole moment and, some humor and that sort of thing. So what I'm really focused on is Vivian thought about it for a moment, but the idea settled with her pretty quickly, followed by, yeah, I guess I am gay. See, that moment, that pivotal moment, is so big of a deal for everybody. Everyone who has ever come out knows the emotional lead up to it, actually saying the words to somebody or even to yourself, and then kind of how you have to process it and come down from that afterwards. That is a whole emotional process. And so essentially what I think ChatGPT was really trying to tell me was that I just glossed over it too quickly. I interpreted it as, well, you had all this other stuff happen, and then suddenly you just like threw it in there and then celebrated it afterwards. And I think what ChatGPT is really trying to tell me is that you need to breathe. That's an emotional moment that you do need to breathe through. You resolved it too quickly, so you do need to, sit in that particular, I guess, micro moment that is part of the overall chapter, just a little bit longer. But I thought it would be nice for this video, before we get into draft, to actually talk out fixing this and going ahead and doing it now. It's something that won't take all that much time. So anyway, so I am going to expand on this. So I think what I was thinking, I had an idea for it a moment ago, and I'm going to probably struggle to articulate it here because I'm having a moment where I don't exactly remember what I was actually thinking, but it was something along the lines of Vivian kind of sitting there and really thinking, and then thinking, did she really want to say the words? Was she really ready to fully admit that, not just to her son, but to herself as well? just what that's called interiority. And then followed by the dialogue of, yes, I guess I am. So I think I've just, kind of figured out what I'm going to do there. So what I'm doing is I'm going to go ahead and just delete that line. Well, not the whole line. I think I can still say Vivian thought about it for a moment, but get rid of the "but the idea settled with her pretty quickly" part, because that's a resolution of that micro beat, that micro moment, and it resolves too quickly. So we're starting with Vivian thought about it for a moment, and I'm gonna do this in real time. I'm not gonna speed it up or cut it out or whatever. I'm gonna do this in real time. So Vivian thought about it for a moment. She'd wondered off and on for a while since she'd come to Atlanta what her sexual identity was. She knew she was attracted to Millie and that she had no attraction to Gregory now. She remembered always being more attracted. Actually, no, not more attracted. Noticing the girls in school more than she noticed the other boys. Then she wondered whether or not she was actually ready to say the words to make the admission to not just her son, but herself also. She sighed and then said, "Yeah, I guess I am." That's a very rough draft of that moment. As I was typing and getting it out, I'm glad that I expanded on it. However, it just still feels a little clunky to me. So this is a situation now where I'm probably going to take this to ChatGPT and just say, "Hey, I looked at your feedback about this moment needing more space. This is what I came up with. I feel like it's clunky. Is it actually clunky, or is this micro moment paced properly?" So that's what I'm going to do now. So I am going to take this to ChatGPT. This is over here. So we're going to see what it says. So it's thinking. It's taking a moment here. And again, this is, kind of as a writing tool, as an assistant. So right away it says, "I don't think it's clunky, but I do think I can see why it felt clunky to write." And it goes on to say, "The issue isn't the pacing. The issue is that you're trying to accomplish 3 different things in a very small space." So it says that Vivian is evaluating her attractions, deciding on a label, and deciding whether she's willing to say the label out loud. And it goes on to say that's a lot of work for 4 sentences. And then, of course, and I kind of anticipated this, it likes where Vivian is narrating, saying that she wondered whether she was ready to say the words out loud and say it not just to her son, but to herself also. And that's the emotional heart of the moment, it says. The earlier lines feel slightly more analytical. Those thoughts are valid, but they read a bit like Vivian building a case before rendering a verdict. And it goes on to say the strongest version of this moment, in my opinion, is the one where the focus stays on the emotional hurdle rather than the evidence. You know what? And the thing is, I just had that thought. The moment that I read that from ChatGPT, where it said that where she was deciding whether to say the words to herself and her son, that was the emotional heart of the moment. That's when I read, I bet it's going to tell me to get rid of the other stuff and just focus on that emotional moment. Focus on the emotional core of that moment, rather. And again, all the feedback it gives, it's very AI telly. Like it's a lot of, it's not this, it's that. Okay, so the strongest version of this moment, in my opinion, is the one where the focus stays on the emotional hurdle rather than the evidence. Because realistically, Vivian already knows. She's not solving a mystery. She's deciding whether she's ready to acknowledge something she's probably known for decades. That's why the final line lands. She sighed and then said, "Yeah, I guess I am." I actually love that response for Vivian. Not, "Yes, I'm gay," but "I've always been gay." Not, "I finally understand who I am," just, "Yeah, I guess I am." It feels very her. Feels like a 50-something woman who isn't interested in making a speech and is simply arriving at a truth. And then it goes on to say, so my reaction is the pacing is fine, the emotional beat works, the line itself works very well. If anything feels awkward, it's because the paragraph is doing a little too much thinking before arriving at the answer. But honestly, if I were reading chapter 11, I wouldn't stop at this passage and think this is clunky. I'd probably think, of course, that's how Vivian would come out, which is usually a pretty good sign that the character voice is carrying the scene. Okay. So I just got rid of all that extra exposition. So I've now started with, instead of Vivian thought about it for a moment, there's now like emotional choreography that's taking place. So like there's like what it's referred to as an action beat, and it's like choreography. So instead of Vivian thought about it for a moment, which is kind of plain and dull in this moment, it's now Vivian took a breath and paused. That's how I imagine her face right now. And then it goes on to say she wondered whether or not she was actually ready to say the words, to make the admission to not just her son but herself also. And I think I could honestly just leave it like that. Change that comma to an M dash, because I do like an M dash. She wondered Vivian took a breath and paused. She wondered whether or not she was actually ready to say the words, M dash, to make the admission to not just her son, but to herself also. Again, now we're kind of getting into really getting the verbiage down right, the prose down right. I had a thought that maybe I could change also to as well. That's more like her speech pattern, I guess. And then she sighed and then said, "Yeah, I guess I am." I feel like instead of saying "I guess," which, to be fair, like to me, when you say like "I guess," I feel like that's not as certain. I feel like she should say, "Yeah, I suppose I am." Because I think "I suppose" is just a little bit more solid. So I'm going to change, "Yeah, I suppose I am." So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the entire context of the moment. So what Kyle says before, basically asking his mom, "Well, you're gay?" And then the emotional moment with Vivian, and then the immediate reaction of Kyle afterwards. I'm going to give that to ChatGPT and say and let it know this is the direction I decided to go in with the moment. I focused on the emotional core of the moment instead of the additional exposition. Okay. Yep, right away it says, "I like this version better. The reason is simple. It shifts the focus from figuring out to admitting it." And then it's just like, and it goes in, it does a lot. Like it'll say, "Look, before Vivian was doing this," and it made the moment about arriving at the conclusion. This version makes the moment about courage. That's the real obstacle. Not knowledge, acceptance. And it's so, even though I thought, remember how I said, "Yeah, I guess I am," like introduced a little bit more uncertainty, maybe wasn't as solid versus the word suppose. ChatGPT says here, "I also really like the slight uncertainty of, yeah, I suppose I am." And you know what? That is fair. Yeah, I suppose I am. So there's still a slight uncertainty there, but I still feel like it's a little bit more, yeah, I'm basically there, versus, yeah, I guess I am. But it also could just be that maybe subconsciously it's not I guess versus it was I guess versus I suppose, as to, what style of lexicon would Vivian use here in that moment. So ChatGPT, it said that was a slight uncertainty of, yeah, I suppose so. And, it's saying a lot of writers would be tempted to make this a big triumphant declaration, but that's not what this is. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. And yeah, so ChatGPT agrees that, yeah, I suppose I am feels very authentic to her voice. And that's, I've said the same thing. And ChatGPT says that the reader doesn't miss the significance of the moment, and Kyle recognizes it for what it is. And it says the sequence has a nice rhythm. It's clean, emotionally focused, and stronger than the previous version, in its opinion. And here's something interesting. It says at its last little piece of feedback, it says also, and this is the bigger thing, it feels like something that came out of a character rather than author intent. I don't hear you trying to make a statement. I hear Vivian answering her son. That's usually when a scene is working. And you know what? That is such a valid piece of feedback. We're going to go ahead and keep drafting. Probably just going to draft the next moment. We're not going to draft the rest of the chapter here. At least I don't think, but we'll see. We may just keep going. So thank you for joining me so far. If you're still here, you're a rock star. Let's go ahead and do some more drafting of chapter 11 of A List of Names for Vivian. It's exciting. It's going to be a great day. I'm really happy with how this is turning out so far. Really, really happy so far. So pleased. I'm still drafting, but I had a moment where I thought I was going to get emotional. That's how you know the scene is working. Okay, back to drafting. Okay, I am back at the desk. I just had to get up for a moment and take care of something. And I am finished drafting the next moment that following Vivian's big coming out scene and big conversation with Kyle. So what I did was I drafted Kyle and Vivian, Nate, Ash, Grant, Barb, and Barb's partner Ollie, all going to dinner to celebrate Vivian, and also for Vivian kind of coming out again, but to the broader friend group. As I was drafting this, I definitely feel like this is very much more of a rough draft. I'm not as, I guess, like, tuned in this morning, I think, as I was like when I was writing the first scene, which I knew the first scene was going to be a really big deal, and I guess that's why I was into it. This is still an important moment because this is really firmly establishing her, support system in Atlanta. So, I mean, it's important. Especially for anyone who is, who is newly, out of the closet and, living their true life. So I do feel like that there is more emotion that I could put in here. So I'm not going to get involved with it. I'm not going to put this into ChatGPT and ask for any feedback or whatever. This is something that I'm definitely going to let it sit, and then I'll look at it again in the developmental editing process of this. So that particular scene was 849 words. Just to give you an idea of where we stand, and honestly, I did not reset my session before typing today. So this is counting drafting yesterday and today. So between the first scene and this scene today, I've drafted 3,557 words. That's the total word count of chapter 11. And the manuscript total is now up to 40,457 words. So that's an awesome milestone. And we have a goal of 60,000 words in the manuscript. So we'll have to see. I do think this, like I said, this scene that I got done drafting, like, it's not bad, but it's not great either. It's just not up there where I would want it to be in terms of I just feel like it's not paced as well as I would like it to. Like, I was just kind of moving through it. So again, we kind of talked about pacing earlier today. I'm kind of already feeling like, pacing through this moment, I feel like it needs a little bit more. And I may, again, be overthinking and be wrong. But at the same time, I need to trust that gut of mine. So I'm thinking that there could be some more setup here. Because this scene mostly focuses on Vivian, really starting to have like a proper friendship with Barb. And we learn a little bit more about Barb, like as far as a little bit about her personality, and we learn like about her career. And I just feel like some of those moments have to stay, have to breathe a little bit. Also, we finally introduce Ollie as an actual character on the page instead of just somebody mentioned. And I feel like we should see more of her. I also have to remember that I still have more of this chapter to draft. I've still got to draft because there's going to be a phone call between Vivian and Millie, because I now need to start moving that arc forward, because we've kind of moved everything else. Vivian's come out. This scene that mainly features Vivian and Barb is definitely setting up Vivian reaching out to Millie. So that's going to be the next moment in this chapter. And it's going to be the final moment in this chapter too. And we're already at 3,500 words. Specifically 3,557. Yeah, that's right. Yes, that's right. 3,557. So, if I expand this scene a little bit more, we'll pretty much get to 3,800 words. And then the Millie moment is probably going to need at least 800, maybe 1,000 words, depending on how I feel like that has to go. Because that's a phone call that kind of starts, kind of gets their arc really going forward. So that's going to need some time on the page as well. And I'm already thinking that when it's all said and done, this chapter, it's not going to be like chapter 9. It's not going to be like over 6,000 words. But I think this is easily going to be a 4,500 to 5,000 word chapter. To push the overall, story forward, you have to ask yourself, well, what is the purpose of this particular scene? And so the purpose of the scene, the second scene after the big Kyle conversation, is mainly for Vivian to come out to her friend group officially, and which is going to solidify their support for her, which is instrumental later in the novel, because the big bad wolf is going to come to call again, right? We're talking about Gregory. And so Vivian's going to need her people. She's going to need her support system to see her through that. So we're really solidifying the support system. So that's kind of the purpose of this second scene. So maybe that's kind of the lens that I need to be making sure I'm looking through all of this. And, you know, hopefully you'll learn something from my struggles with my writing journey. So anyway, so overall, this is shaping up to be pretty good. I do definitely want to do some more drafting of this. I think what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and end it here. We'll pick up drafting in chapter 11 in the next video. So don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell so that you are notified whenever I post a new video. Links to my author Instagram and my Substack are below in the description. Thank you so much for being here. I'm happy that you're here. And we will see you in the next one. Take care.